There is something worse than a people who argue badly, and it is a people who can no longer argue at all. Not because they have been silenced, but because they no longer inhabit the same world. Censorship is a familiar danger, and democracies have learned to recognize it. But the dissolution of a shared reality is something older and less dramatic. Not a boot on the throat, but a fog in the square, where two citizens can stand side by side, pointing at the same event, and see entirely different things. America has entered this fog. The problem is not, as the comfortable diagnosis would have it, that Americans disagree. Americans have always disagreed. Disagreement is the system. The problem is that the ground on which disagreement is possible, a shared set of facts, a common evidentiary world, the baseline agreement that certain things happened and certain things did not, has fractured beneath the argument like ice under the weight of two armies who forgot they were standing on the same lake. 8 in 10 Americans now say that voters on opposite sides of the political divide cannot agree on basic facts, not on interpretations, not on policies, on facts, the raw, stubborn, pre-ideological material from which arguments are supposed to be built. This is not polarization. Polarization is when two people disagree about what to do with the same information. This is something worse. This is two populations constructing separate informational universes and then wondering why the other side appears to have lost its mind. The founders understood something about argument that their descendants have largely forgotten, which is that it requires a floor. You cannot wrestle in midair. You can only wrestle on common ground, and the quality of the ground determines whether the contest is sport or chaos. When Jefferson drafted the Declaration, he did not merely announce independence. He submitted evidence. "Let facts be submitted to a candid world," he wrote, and then presented 27 grievances, each specific, each verifiable, each an appeal not to sentiment but to observation. The Declaration is not a poem. It is a legal brief addressed to mankind, and it assumes, as all legal briefs must, that the jury shares a world with the plaintiff. The Federalist Papers operated on the same assumption. Hamilton and Madison disagreed about the scope of federal power, the role of the executive, the danger of faction, and the proper structure of the judiciary. They disagreed about nearly everything that could be disagreed about within the framework of Republican government. But they argued from a common evidentiary world. When Hamilton cited the history of the Greek confederacies, he expected Madison to recognize the same history. When Madison analyzed the causes of faction, he expected his readers to test his analysis against their own experience of the same reality. The argument was fierce, personal, and occasionally dishonest. But it was an argument, not a collision of fantasies. Thucydides knew this. In his account of the Civil War at Corcyra, the event that remains, after 24 centuries, the most precise diagnosis of what happens when a republic turns on itself, he observed that the first casualty was not life, but language. Words lost their ordinary meanings and were changed to suit the actions they justified. Reckless daring became courage. Prudent hesitation became cowardice. Moderation became a mask for weakness. The corruption of language preceded the corruption of everything else, because once words no longer pointed to shared realities, persuasion became impossible and only force remained. America's epistemological fracture is not a simple story of one side lying and the other telling the truth. It is a story of two certainties, each internally coherent, each impervious to evidence from the other, and each absolutely convinced that the opposing certainty is not merely mistaken, but fabricated. The political right has constructed an epistemology rooted in direct experience. What you see with your own eyes, what your community knows to be true, what your grandfather understood without a credential to his name. This epistemology distrusts expertise on principle, not because experts are always wrong, but because expertise has been so frequently weaponized by institutions that claimed neutrality while pursuing agendas. The distrust is not irrational. It is earned. and it has hardened into a conviction that the credentialed class does not merely err, but lies, systematically, about everything from public health to the climate to the integrity of elections. The political left has constructed an epistemology rooted in institutional consensus, what the peer-reviewed literature says, what the credentialed experts agree upon, what the professional class, trained in the relevant discipline, has determined to be the case. This epistemology distrusts common sense on principle, not because ordinary people are stupid, but because individual perception is so easily distorted by bias, anecdote, and self-interest. The distrust is not irrational. It is also earned, and it has hardened into a conviction that those who reject expert consensus do so not from honest disagreement, but from ignorance, bigotry, or malice. Both certainties are fatal in the same way. They make the other side's experience of reality illegitimate. Not wrong. That could be corrected by argument. Illegitimate, which can only be corrected by force or by exile. When you believe your opponent is not merely in error but operating from fabricated evidence, you have not lost an argument. You have lost a fellow citizen, and a republic that hemorrhages citizens in this way is not long for the world. The deeper pathology is this: both sides have made trust itself a partisan commitment. Confidence in the press, in universities, in the scientific establishment, in the military, in organized religion. Each of these has become a signal not of judgment, but of allegiance. To trust the wrong institution is to reveal which tribe you belong to. And so the very act of evaluating evidence, the foundational act of reasoning, has been swallowed by the very faction it was supposed to restrain. It would be convenient to blame this fracture on human nature alone. Human nature is sufficient to explain faction. Madison said as much, and he was right that the causes of faction are sown in the nature of man. But human nature is not sufficient to explain the speed and totality of the current dissolution. Something else is at work, and it is not subtle. The machinery of separate realities is, in the literal sense, a machine. It is an algorithm that learns what you believe and feeds you more of it. It is a cable architecture that discovered in the 1990s that indignation is more profitable than information. It is a social media ecosystem in which a young American now trusts a stranger's video at the same rate she trusts a national newsroom, not because she has evaluated both and found them equivalent, but because the distinction between journalism and performance has been engineered out of her experience. And now the machine has acquired a new capacity. It can fabricate, not distort, not spin, not selectively edit. Fabricate. An image of a candidate committing a crime that never occurred. An audio recording of a public official saying words she never spoke. A video, indistinguishable from reality, of an event that did not happen. This is not a future threat. It is a present condition. Congress has passed no law to govern it. The regulatory agencies charged with protecting electoral integrity are divided along the same partisan lines that define every other institution. 26 states have attempted to fill the federal vacuum with their own statutes. The result is not order, but a patchwork of rules that no citizen can be expected to navigate and no platform is required to enforce. The comfortable response is to say that people have always been credulous, that propaganda is as old as politics, and that the Republic has survived worse. This is true and irrelevant. The Republic survived propaganda when the means of producing it were expensive and the means of checking it were accessible. A newspaper could print a lie, but the lie could be verified against other newspapers, public records, and the testimony of witnesses who shared a factual world. What has changed is not the human appetite for confirmation, but the technological capacity to satisfy it completely. To build, around each citizen, a sealed informational environment in which every doubt is answered, every suspicion confirmed, and every inconvenient fact replaced by a more congenial one. The Republic does not need its citizens to agree. It has never needed that, and was not designed for it. What it needs is something simultaneously more modest and more difficult. Citizens who inhabit the same evidentiary world and are willing to be corrected by it. This is not a policy prescription. No law can compel a citizen to doubt his own certainty. No regulation can force a man to seek out the argument he finds most threatening. No algorithm can be redesigned to make discomfort profitable. What is required is a discipline, the hardest discipline a free people can practice, because it demands the one thing that neither tribe is willing to surrender, the conviction that they already know. The duty of the citizen in a republic is not to be right. It is to be correctable. A man who holds his beliefs with enough conviction to argue for them and enough humility to revise them when the evidence demands it is the only material from which self-government can be built. A man who holds his beliefs as identity, who experiences contradiction as assault, is not a citizen. He is a partisan, and partisans do not govern themselves. They merely take turns governing each other. What this means in practice is unglamorous. It means reading the news source you most despise, not to collect ammunition, but to understand what the other side's world looks like from the inside. It means holding your own information sources to the same standard of scrutiny you apply to your opponents, and discovering, with some discomfort, that your sources are also imperfect, also selective, also occasionally wrong. It means tolerating the experience of doubt, which is not a sign of weakness, but the signature of an honest mind. It means accepting that the man who disagrees with you about the facts may not be a liar or a fool, but a person whose experience of the same reality has been shaped by different pressures, different losses, and different fears. This is not relativism. Relativism says there is no truth. This is something harder. The insistence that truth exists, that it can be approached, and that no one, no individual, no faction, no credentialed class, no populist movement has a monopoly on it. The scientific temper applied to civic life does not say that all opinions are equal. It says that all opinions are provisional, that the strongest conviction must remain open to correction, and that the willingness to be wrong is the price of admission to the enterprise of knowing anything at all. There is a sentence that has never been more relevant to the American experiment, and it is this: the opposite of knowledge is not ignorance. It is certainty. The Republic was built by men who distrusted certainty, who designed a machine of overlapping powers, competing jurisdictions, and protected dissent precisely because they knew that the man who is sure he is right is the most dangerous man in the room. They did not agree with one another. They did not trust one another, but they inhabited the same world, and they submitted their arguments to it. The ground is cracking. Not because Americans are dumber than they were, or more wicked or less patriotic. The ground is cracking because the machinery of modern life has made it possible, for the first time in the history of the Republic, to live entirely inside your own confirmation, to never encounter a fact that disturbs your peace, to mistake the walls of your informational prison for the boundaries of the world. A republic of the certain is not a republic at all. It is a war waiting for its first shot.